Welcome, everybody, to the SoxProspects.com podcast, the web's number one source for information on the Boston Red Sox from top to bottom, from Fort Myers to Worcester, across the Pike to Fenway, and all stops in between. Thank you for listening. My name is Chris Hatfield. I'm the executive editor of Sox Prospects. I'll be joined shortly by our director of scouting, Ian Kundle, as well as a couple of guests today. We've got a pretty great episode for you, entering the season with a State of the System Jamboree, with MLB.com's Jim Callis and the Boston Globe's Alex Speier. Of course, both of them are multimedia sensations. Jim's also on MLB Network, in addition to being on the MLB Pipeline podcast and MLB.com. Alex, of course, is on the Boston Globe, does Baseball America's Red Sox prospect list, as well as moonlights as Stat Masterson on the NESN broadcasts of the Red Sox games. As you all know, these two have been on our podcast a number of times before. We love having them on. We're really excited. Why is it just me right now, though? Quick note, we did have some technical issues with my internet. It's my fault. If Jim or Alex or Ian says something that sounds a little clipped and maybe doesn't quite make sense, I tried my best to clean it up, but my internet was kind of cutting out at times and therefore muting them somehow. I don't know what the deal was. We'll hopefully have that figured out before the next episode. But what would a podcast be without some kind of an apology for an audio issue? Of course, if you want to support the podcast, we can do things like have this great jamboree with us, Jim, and Alex. You can do that a few ways. Tell a friend, tell a neighbor, tell someone who is also a multimedia sensation about the podcast so they can listen. You can support us on patreon.com/SoxProspects. Pledge a certain amount per episode and get some neat perks. And we're not going to do an outro, so let me give a shout out up front to this episode's $5 level Patreon supporters. That'd be Jason Stoneburner, Jason Parker, Mike Granger, Mike Mignosa, Jeff Richardson, Michael Cullen, John McGee, Nicholas Lenson, Paul Manish, and James P. McMahon. Thank you all for your support. Thank you all for listening. You can also rate and review us on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever it is that you listen. That would also be really helpful. We talk about a lot of things in the show. I think you're going to really enjoy it. We talk about the state of the system, talk about ranking the players in the system, talk about the history of doing this. How is it different now than it used to be? I think it was a terrific conversation. Goes about an hour. Hope you all will love it. I am recording this from a hotel room in Fort Myers, Florida. So we're going to have some great Fort Myers content for you soon. We know you're going to love that as well, so stay tuned. Shoot us some emails if you want. podcast@soxprospects.com with some things you want to know about from the fort. What are we seeing down here? Also, I'm putting this up on Thursday, May the 16th. We recorded this a couple days ago. If you are listening to this before the broadcast of Friday's game, all I'm saying is you may want to be watching in the 7th inning. Just saying. Anyway, here's the episode with us, with Jim, with Alex. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for your support. We'll be back in your eardrums really soon with our reports from the fort. Thanks, everybody. Okay, well, now we are pleased to open for business the inaugural edition of the Red Sox Prospects Ranking / System Status Jamboree, State of the System Jamboree, with two favorite guests that we've had back on the podcast over and over again through the years with good reason. Our good friends from the Boston Globe and from Baseball America's Red Sox prospect list from the Baseball America Prospect Handbook /BaseballAmerica.com, and from many other publications through the years, but we've always loved having him on. Alex Speier, joining us live from Dunedin, Florida. Welcome to the show, Alex. It's always a pleasure to have you back on.
I am delighted and never feel more alive from Dunedin than when I'm on a Sox Prospects podcast.
It's a very specific feeling, but we appreciate it. And then, of course, we're joined by our good friend from MLB.com, MLB Pipeline, the MLB Pipeline podcast, MLB Network, any coverage they do of prospects of the draft, etc. You'll always catch him on there. Our good friend Jim Callis. Jim, welcome to the show from Arizona, where you are not going to be dealing with the rain. Neither of you are dealing with the rain/snow that Ian's going to get hit by on his way out of town on Wednesday. But Jim, thank you for coming back on the show again, as always.
No, I'm glad to be here. I've kind of given up hope of catching Alex for most appearances on this podcast. Like, and since I can't gain on him, but it's fine. I've made peace with that. But it's all good. It's all good.
I mean, the reality is that I bought them off, Jim. Like I needed the title. I needed something on you after, you have me by like, I think I'll never catch you in the number of Red Sox rankings that we do.
Well, and that's my
I catch anyone in this podcast on it. So I had to find some way of claiming a superlative title.
And Alex, I still feel guilty about that because in my I think I edited the first 13 prospect handbooks, and I always knew, so I did the Red Sox in every handbook, and I always knew that you were very capable of doing the Red Sox, but I enjoyed doing them so much I would not give them up, and I felt guilty about it. And I'm glad that after I've left, they've been in good hands. But you would have more. Well, you might be catching up to me in prospect handbooks now.
Well, in prospect handbooks, but you've done, you've been doing Red Sox rankings, it's not like you gave them
back
up
to
when you got to
1990.
MLB.com.
Yeah, I think going back to 1990 at Baseball America when we merely did top 10s, which I think all of us would agree, top 10 seems so easy. Like you can do a top 10 so quickly. But anyway, yes.
Well, so this is interesting though, because I'm kind of curious on how for all. I mean, I know on our end the process has changed a ton over time. I mean, I think Mike started the site in 2003 or 4. I want to say. I think it's 3. I think we're actually gonna hit our 20th anniversary this fall, and the process for us has changed a lot over time. So maybe that's a good place to start. Is how for you guys has the process of pulling together a ranking changed over time since you've been doing it?
And JJ brought up the point, and I hadn't thought about this one. I was like, but it's a great point. It's both easier and harder, I think, because there's so much more information available. Like when we did it in 1990, I don't even remember if people really had cell phones, to be honest with you. And I mean that seriously. Yeah, there certainly was no internet. There was the concept of, hey, I'll pull up video of Miguel Blaise on my phone and look. That didn't exist. Our big weapon at Baseball America is we had a toll-free number you could call in to order a subscription, and we would get scouts to call in on the toll-free number. That's how we could get scouts to call us back, because long distance was probably like $1.50 a minute, back then, unless you were calling on weekends. And so back then it was a lot simpler. There just wasn't information out there. But now I feel like I'm not doing the prospect justice if I'm not seeking out video and data. Before there was only so much you could get and you could just bang them out. Now there's just so much out there. And I think the longer we've done it, you just get more sources too. So you can run it by more people inside or outside of an organization too. So I'd never thought of it the way JJ put it, but I was like, you are right. It's easier because there's a lot more information, but also it's harder because you feel like you've got to absorb all of that information.
Yeah, and the monopoly on information is no longer belongs, like, does not belong to the same degree inside the game, right? Like it's you have you guys as Sox prospects have kind of are trailblazers in terms of like being in terms of providing this like extraordinary service to a fan base about prospects, but like other people have seen that model and are trying to and they're trying to make and are trying to forge their own careers by creating this fascinating available database of whether it's actually a database, they're contributing to this ecosystem of a massive amount of information, and so there's a lot more to sift through, and a lot more and you do have I agree, Jim. We are at a point where if you don't know what the guy looks like in some respect when he's on a baseball field, then it's then like you can't just kind of go on spec regarding a Bigfoot, right? Like there's something wrong with the evaluation process if you aren't able to like make sure that your description matches what the player looks like on the field.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think that's been our experience too, where we have just, like Jim was saying, with the number of people you can talk to, the amount of data you have access to, I mean, Ian, right? Like the number of people that we can get access to and talk to, and it's easier for us to get to the field and things like that. I mean, right? Our sources over time, not capital S, like just places we can get information. It just changes, and then it
Yeah.
requires you to change your process. Not you, Ian. You generally you.
Well, I also think it's when like, and you guys started obviously doing this before I did, but even when I started, there wasn't the data available to teams, and now to us also was just nowhere near at the level it is now, especially like batted ball data, pitch data, like all of that wasn't really thought of when I started doing this. And I'm sure it was the same with you guys. And now it's like, you literally, if you talk to someone, they can tell you down to like a millisecond, pretty much any information, or, any angle of every pitch, like anything you want to know about the game is measured now. And I think having having to blend that with the video, and then going out to seeing games and talking to scouts or seeing games, there's a lot more layers to it, I think. And that's kind of the biggest evolution to me, is having to bring all those together. Whereas in the past, it was, you call a scout. What did the scout see? Now it's okay. You talk to a scout, you talk to an analyst, you go to see them yourself. Like it's just so many facets now that we learn more each year, and there's different ways to measure things.
Mm-hmm. And I guess maybe that's a good transition into the system now, because I think there's been, especially this year, some of it external and some of it, let's be honest, the team is to some degree. I mean, I can still think of the winter weekend town hall event where, Chaim Bloom got asked point blank about the farm system, and he was talking specifically about where it was when he came in versus where it is now. When you all, Alex and Jim, went through the process this year of evaluating the system and setting your ranking, what was your takeaway? I mean, I know we've got different outlets have done their rankings. Jim, I know you all had a podcast recently where you were talking about the like AL East, how they all stacked up against each other, but I don't think you guys have come out with your 30 rankings. If
we're waiting till after the WBC, so they'll be out in about 10 days or so.
Okay. But I guess just
I was gonna say, it's an interesting system. We ranked. It was weird. We talked about how we weren't going to do that, and then like in the middle of the podcast, like, oh, we're doing this. It's like, well, we can't just rank farm systems off the top of our head. Like we actually have to think this through. So it wasn't very efficient. And I think we had the Red Sox in the 5 to 7 range, but I don't know. It's a little bit of a oddly structured system when you look at least to me, when you look at the prospects, because you have, four. We don't count Japanese players, so Yoshida is not on ours. But Marcelo Meyer's an elite prospect. Tristan Casas is the best first base prospect in baseball. And then you have Rafael and Miguel Blaise, and so that part looks really good. But I don't think it stacks up as an especially deep system in terms of guys that you feel like are real solid. Like, hey, there's a bunch of big league regulars, or there's a bunch of big league starters. And again, I haven't quantified this or looked at it closely yet, because we haven't gotten around to actually ranking the systems. I think they've got to have one of the thinnest farm systems in terms of pitching prospects in baseball. It's really like, I like some of their guys, but Mata's coming off of Tommy John, and Brandon Walter was hurt for a big chunk of last year. And then you got Gonzalez and Perales, who are really interesting, but light years from the big leagues right now. So it's to me kind of a top heavy hitter driven system, more than most.
I would agree that is unquestionably the case, right? Like the appeal of the system lies in relatively high ceilings for that big four of position playing prospects. I think that the interesting part of the exercise is, how much do you trust the Red Sox solidified as like sure thing guys into being contributing dudes, right? And that's the failure of their farm system over a period of roughly 10 to 15 years, right? Like the post like Daniel Bard era, where they did a crap job for 10 years of developing homegrown guys with, like, you have Dubron, you have Junichi Tsuzawa during that time. But I mean, the fact that I'm identifying the individual cases tells you something. And I do think that we're seeing something interesting. So this is the challenge of the Red Sox system. Number one, like Brian Bayo never like peaked, right? So that's interesting. Like their farm system, Jim, where would Brian Bayo rank as a pitching prospect if he were eligible?
Well, we had him ranked until the day. I mean, he was in our top 100.
Yeah, like after his
yeah.
where would he be?
I'd say probably without having looked at it closely, in top 50 somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's funny, and that's the funny thing about farm system rankings too, is if he had pitched 10 fewer innings, the Red Sox system would look even better because they'd have an extra top 100 prospect.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. But, Bayo strikes me as an interesting case because he's a guy who developed in their system, turned him over from a 4-seam to a 2-seam guy, turned him over from being primarily curveball guy to being like this wipeout slider, not wipeout, but, sometimes there's that flashed 55, 60 together from him. And, so they helped develop him into a contributing big leaguer. They helped repurpose and then get him over the hump to being a contributing big leaguer. Cutter Crawford, to me, is a particularly interesting development case for them because day 3 draft pick who, really was barely on top 30 lists, right? Like, I don't think I ever had him above 20. I don't know about any of you guys.
Same thing with us.
Yeah. It's possible that I had him in the low teens, but
we might have had him like 18 or something.
Yeah, right. Like, and that was because their system was crap at the time when you would have been ranking him above the top 20. It was so bad. It is so bad if you go back to the 2019 rankings. Like, it's mind-blowing.
I don't think people understand. That is not emphasized enough how much progress has been made since 2019 because it's so bad back then.
Even if it's just with guys who were there who developed, like,
right, exactly.
That was a system that was like guys who were far away and never developed, and like, what a mess. But at any rate, like, there are interesting signs that they've become an organization that does a better job of taking talent and turning it into big league contribution. And if you do that, if you do that on a consistent basis, then then the way that I like, to me, and maybe I'm wrong about this, Jim, you have broader perspective on this because I've only looked at it through the lens of the Red Sox. But if you do that on a consistent basis, then everyone in your system starts looking better if you become a good development organization, because there's better floor, right? Like, there's better floor if you're an organization that isn't terrible at turning talent into big league production. And so I think that, like, the top heavy nature of the Red Sox system to me is undeniable in terms of like where the system is at. So the question is really where you take that, like, as you judge what the Red Sox are as an organization, like, to me, it's like where you look at that like 5 through 15 group, even because, you can take a guy like Murphy, who's a little bit outside of the top 10 for me, Brandon Walter, who kind of sneaks into it. Like, if you believe that the Sox are a team that can develop those guys, or even Amada, like, if they're a good development system, then they figure out a way of getting that guy to be like a 2+ times through the order guy. And if they're not, then the value of everything in their system diminishes.
Yeah, I think that's all fair.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about that all the time about how 7 through 18 or so we wish were better. It's getting better, but it's certainly, that top group. And maybe this is a good day to talk about that top group because, Alex, you were in Dunedin today for the Miguel Blaze show and wrote about it. But very clear number one, I think, at this point, with followed by 3, clear next guys. When you were in the process of ranking them, I think we've got Casas, Blaze, Rafaela, Alex. I guess, yeah. Alex, your list has them in that order as well, with Masataka Yoshida at 4, and then Jim on the pipeline list. It's Meyer, Casas, Rafaela, Blaze. While we are consistent on that, did you all have any thoughts about a different order there? Was there any temptation to move a Rafaela above a Casas or a Blaze above a Rafaela, or what was the feedback you were getting on that group? And your thoughts on how you were going to set them up?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could, I should know this off the top of my head. I mean, Blaze and Rafael are pretty close to each other on our top 100, which shows how close we have them. And I think that's a classic floor versus ceiling argument to some extent. I mean, I still don't quite know what to make of Rafaela with the plate discipline, but I've written this. I mean, not that it's an original thought, but I think he's the most versatile. He's one of the best defenders in the minors, obviously, and he's probably the most versatile. I think he could probably play plus defense at more positions than anybody in the minor leagues. And if he is a 2020 guy like he was last year, then he's pretty good. So I gave him the level. It's not like Blaze has, now that you can really measure plate discipline by strikeout to walk ratios in the Florida Complex League, but it's not like he's the most disciplined guy either. So I kind of gave Rafaela the nod, but if Blaze goes to low A this year and performs, I could see flipping them. They're very close to me.
Yeah, I think that Rafaela that Blaze needs to just be out in full season ball, and we have to see what happens there, because Rafaela has been productive at the upper levels, right? Which is a qualitatively different accomplishment. Granted, there's an age difference. Even with his lack of plate discipline, it did not sabotage him in the upper levels. And for as highly as everyone regards Miguel Blaze, I think that we all probably have to acknowledge, oh yeah, there's a chance that he'll never hit above a ball, right? We don't know. There's that. So I think that it's a pretty straightforward ceiling floor. But if Blaze starts performing in full season ball, and it might take a little bit of time for that to happen, then I think that he, even with Rafaela's elite defense, moves past him, because I do think that I hate to react strongly to samples of even spring training, but you give Blaze greater, I think that you also give him greater latitude to be able to adjust and improve his plate discipline, having not turned the corner in that regard as a 22-year-old at this point. And the approach is concerning. Like today, he got blown away by fastballs in the zone, and he was also chasing pitches of all varieties outside of the zone. And it hasn't been a great spring for him in terms of making any progress in that regard.
Mm-hmm. And I actually need to probably correct myself. We have Blaze at 3. I just realized. Probably should be looking at my list when I say that. And Ian, maybe do you want to talk a little bit about that process for us on that end?
Yeah, I think that for me and for us, I think it came down to that what Alex talked about. Rafaela, there's obviously the defense is incredible, but I think there are still serious questions with the bat. And I think that the upside and kind of just some of the stuff that Blaze showed last year was enough for us. It's super close, obviously, but I'm just concerned that Rafael, things like the chase rate, he had top 3 chase rate in the system last year, and it didn't get any better, obviously, when he got up to AA. His quality of contact is not the best. It's pretty middling. His exit velos, that stuff like that is not great. And just seeing him even in spring training this year and talking to scouts who have seen the Red Sox play several times, I still don't think when he's taking a pitch, it seems to me, and what they're hearing or seeing is that it's just he's taking it for the sake of it. There's not a meaningful take there. It's, I'm going up there and I'm taking the first pitch regardless of where it is. And I think that's the thing that he needs to develop, is just that approach at the plate where he has good hand-eye, he's got good bat to ball skills. But if you're making a bunch of weak contact on pitches out of the zone or constantly falling behind, you're not going to be able to reach your ceiling at the plate. And I think that's just my concern with him is he going to turn into someone who's an elite defender, but is an empty average? And, even if you're making contact, if you're a 220 hitter, your defense is going to have to be insane in order to hold down even an everyday role. And I mean, I think he does have that ability with the defense, which is why he's that high for us still. But I'm just concerned about his kind of approach at the plate. And as Alex said, what he's shown in the spring, I think is kind of bared that out. He's kind of done what I expected. He's 231, 250, 231 right now. And I just don't think the at-bats have shown any meaningful change or progression from last year.
And we'll see if they let him go back to being him to some degree too, right? I mean, there's something to be said for working on it, and there's something to be said for if by working on it, we're making you worse, right? So, is everything okay over there, Alex? Looks like you're...
Oh yeah, Mike Trout just hit a ball 3 miles. So it's now 9-0 US.
It looked like you were worried that was going to hit you.
I think I was worried about that, and I'm in Florida and he's in Arizona. So
yeah.
I thought you were just reacting to the final out of the Great Britain game again. What a great victory that was earlier today.
Our resident Anglophile here in Ian Cundall. All right, so like we mentioned, it's very nice. He's got his Green Lions on.
His shirt has far more drip than the Great Britain uniforms.
Oh, what a beautiful jersey.
Yeah.
I'm in the process of trying to acquire one. So
classically minimalist. Minimalist.
Microsoft Paint special.
Yeah.
It's giving too much credit to Microsoft Paint. All right. Like we said, I think after you get those top 4 out of the way, things get interesting. So I'm curious. I think both Jim and Alex, I think both of you had Mikey Romero next at 5/6, depending on whether you've got Yoshida in there. But it seems like there's almost another tier of, York, Mata, Romero, depending on how far you want to expand it. There's maybe a Walter in there. There's, then you start talking guys like Anthony Perales. Where did you kind of see, we've talked generally about how, after that top heavy group, the system goes down a little bit. What did you see as kind of strengths in that group, weaknesses, guys that stood out to you for any particular reason to put them up where they are, and who maybe, whether it's Romero next or some guy who's after that, who stood out to you as guys that, in the next group who maybe could move, maybe seem strongest, but with something they got to fix. I don't know.
Yeah, I do think that the Mikey Romero, Nick York relative rankings, like having Mikey Romero ahead of Nick York, does reflect in part upon the elimination of the shift and the sudden increased demands that are going to fall on that defensive position, right? Like we're only a couple of years removed from thinking, oh, you can stick Michael Chavis at second base. You're all right. Like, you can mask his deficiencies. You can no longer mask those deficiencies. And for Nick York, the fact that I think like what he did was extraordinary as a hitter in that first professional season. What he did in his second professional season was not extraordinary. And that puts a great deal of, there's always been so much pressure on his bat. And now, the detriment of having defensive limitations is magnified, certainly, I think, by rules. And so I think that's kind of an interesting part of the process. Mata has a chance to leapfrog, to move up pretty quickly. I think that like the Red Sox certainly are quite pumped about what they've seen from him this spring. He, in his first few outings, was throwing strikes. Granted, doing so is a different task at the beginning of spring training when guys aren't exactly dialed in terms of plate discipline, but ball strike was viable, and the shape, it just feels like he has a better sense of what he's doing with his pitch execution, like working well to like, okay, I have this like two-seamer that I'm working with at the bottom half of the zone, and then I can really spin the slider off of that and get it below the zone. And just the quality of execution and tunneling and like having an idea seem to be taking a step forward. Mata's kind of a victim of the fact that like, and with all of those guys, like York is a victim of the fact that he didn't play that much last year, right? Like his numbers might have looked a lot different, or we might be viewing him differently if there weren't all of a sudden like this, hey, why does he get injured quite this much? And Mikey Romero might be viewed, will be viewed differently at the end of this year than at the beginning of it once he gets more exposure in pro baseball. So I think that what we're seeing in that next tier, and where you can take that down to Roman Anthony, and you can take that down to Brandon Walter, who has barely pitched in professional baseball despite being 26, and Edinson Paulino, who has never played above low A ball. You're just dealing with some guys, like you're just dealing with guys who don't have a huge performance track, and that's the issue. And like basically no one in Double A, right? They don't have anyone who's they will, like the end of the season in Portland will look interesting by the time that Marcelo gets there. But until then, it's a kind of thin affiliate, unless there's a shock the world type of leap forward. And I don't know who that would be. But I don't think any of us saw Cedar Rafaela coming as a top 100 guy who would end the year in Portland. So, it requires one of those for their system to have really additional upper levels prospects who have an established track record.
Yeah, I think I came at it from the same place on Romero versus York. I mean, you can York hit better in the fall league, and everybody hits in the fall league. So you can fall league performance is what it is. But if you looked at the fall league and you could say, okay, he got the swing back. He's making better decisions. I'm going to attribute the year somewhat to he had injuries. He tried to do too much to make up for lost time. Okay. But the thing you can't kind of hope and wish away is even the scouts are like, you know what? He's hitting better again. Really thought his athleticism regressed last year. And so to what Alex was saying, like, I think you're kind of hoping he can play second base, and it might be a stretch. And Mikey Romero's got a chance to play shortstop. So there's a huge defensive gap there. I think if Nick York had come out and performed anywhere close to how he had the year before, we'd be like, well, maybe he's not a second baseman, but he can really hit. So that's why I went there. And, I think Brandon Walter's probably, we all know who Brandon Walter is. I think the average fan is like, oh, this guy's 26 and he's barely pitched and he came from Delaware. What's the deal? He's got really good stuff and he has a ton of strikes. It's just, I think people were starting to notice him. What was his strikeout to walk ratio? Like 68-3 or whatever it was in AA. And then he got hurt, hurt his neck, or they thought he hurt his neck and it was a bulging disc. So he didn't pitch again. So 2 years ago, I was like, Brandon Walter seems a lot better than Jay Groom to me, even though he's not, as famous as Jay Groom. But I think what stands out about that, the immediate group after the top four is just how young they are. Romero's 19, York's 20. You got the two pitchers, Mata and Walter, who are a little bit older, obviously. But Paulino on our list is 9. He's 20. Roman Anthony's 18. Blaze Jordan's 20. Gonzalez, Wilkin Gonzalez is 20. Luis Perales is 19. That's a ton. None of those guys can even drink legally right now. And you're talking about a ton of variance, like we're talking about with Blaze, where these guys, when they get to full season ball or they start rising through full season ball, we may be like, wow, these guys are really good. We're all in on them. But at the same time, it would be extraordinary if the Red Sox hit on every one of those guys. Some of these guys are going to get exposed when they face better pitching. So it's going to be, I feel like this list could look a lot different even a year from now, because I think these are high variance prospects and even high variance just in how they could perform in 2022 when they start facing, or 2023, when they start facing more advanced pitching. So it wasn't the easiest. It was an easy list in that it was kind of like, okay, these guys all belong in the next group. But I think, again, because they're so young and so many different outcomes, you could rank them. You could kind of justify what order to put them in. And I know even internally, it's a lot different than at BA where we would discuss a list. And I know John Manuel and I would kind of ride roughshod over the list. We'd be the final verdict. And at MLB.com, I can get feedback. The people I work with were like, Brandon Walter seems kind of high. And it's like, no, he's not your typical 26-year-old left-hander. His stuff's really good and he throws a lot of strikes. Don't just look at the age. But it's going to be interesting to see how these guys shake out. And then the back half of the list, it's guys who are old and guys they just signed out of the draft. I don't purport to know where every draft guy's going, but I didn't see Dalton Rogers in the 3rd round or Chase Meadroth in the 4th round. Who knows how good those guys are? We'll find out this year.
I just want to interject that either Chris, I think Chris has a growth coming out of him. I think it's a cat's tail. There's a cat currently appearing on Chris's screen that seems to have taken over.
I am not a cat. I am not a cat, Your Honor.
Mm-hmm.
He's channeling Dr. Evil right now.
There's
the lawyer who was at
right. There was an inspired Cheshire Cat grin or something happening there, perhaps from a cat, perhaps from Chris. We'll never know.
It is kind of weird to look at that next group because one thing that I find, I forget who mentioned it before, but there is almost that bubble in Portland where you've got this group of guys it's the Murphys and Walters and Manuel Valdez gets thrown into the mix. These Worcester guys, right, who maybe not the highest ceilings in the world, but they're close, right? And then you just have these two Greenville and Salem teams that are loaded with what ifs, right? With maybe higher ceilings potentially. Who knows what, Jordan's hit tool turns into. He's already maybe a little bit ahead of where we had him. Who knows what Paulino turns into. Is he a utility guy? Is he a future infield guy? Trying to apples to apples that group, I think has been maybe not. Maybe we do it every year, but it just does seem like they have a lot of these guys that are coming up together in that next group. Jim, maybe one thing that I'm curious about, because you've kind of, as we mentioned, have a little more of this national outlook, and maybe this is a little unfair to ask on March 13th as opposed to maybe April 7th, but if you look at a Salem roster that potentially has Blaise Romero, Anthony Perales, a little bit lower, and Elmer Rodriguez, Cruz, Jettix, and Paez, looking at the list y'all have, Luis Ravello, who's on your top 30, both of your top 30s, in fact. As far as nationally, how does that team look in terms of again, it's tough to say without knowing what every team looks like, but it seems like that'd be one of the stronger teams prospect wise, at least at the level. Is that fair to say? If not, maybe not in a top 10, but it's a strong one.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say because, again, I haven't, like you just said, Chris, I'm not looking at every other system, like how those teams are going to come together. But yeah, you could definitely say that. I know, like, it's always easier to like guys who haven't had a chance to fail yet, too. And so you could sit here and be like, man, the ceilings on these guys. I mean, and I do it too. I don't even use it as a criticism, but it's, and I know I do it as a writer where it's like, you get tired, like, man, like, I'm not a big David Hamilton fan, or I'm not really sure. I mean, Zach Kelly's a great story, but you can only rank Zach Kelly so high on your list. So right. I'm going to go with all these 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds, and we just haven't seen them against higher levels. So yeah, I do think you can basically look at that as the glass is half empty or the glass is half full. You can say on one hand, yeah, a lot of their best prospects are going to be, at the lower of full season levels, and it's really exciting. But it's also scary because a year from now, we may be like, ooh, some of those guys didn't adjust to full season ball, or they got to high A and got exposed a little bit. And it's right. I mean, just look at Nick York. I mean, I know Nick York finished 2021 in high A, but he spent most of that year in the Carolina League and was great. And then he spent I know he was injured, but he spent a full year in high A last year, and he looked like a totally different hitter. So yeah, it's weird. I guess you can have cause for optimism and concern at the same time. Sure. And that's kind of how I see the system. Like there's a bunch of really young guys who are exciting and interesting, but from a Red Sox standpoint, you wish you had more guys you were excited about at the AA, AAA level who you're like, okay, these guys are going to help the Red Sox in 23 or 24. They don't have a ton of those guys.
And it's worth noting that, like, I feel like in the last couple of years, and I would love to hear all of your guys' thoughts on this. I feel like there's been a clear shift in the trade market in terms of how, like, who's getting valued. You are not seeing deals getting done for dudes that, like, if they are not close to major league ready, right? Like, you just aren't seeing, certainly secondary, like, aside from a Meyer or a Blaise. Right.
Yeah,
like
the exception is the elite guys, like the Soto trade. James Wood and Susana are both, I think, they're top 100 on MLB. Maybe no, Susana.
Not Susana yet,
but they're both considered, like, for their age, they're both considered the high end guys. But other than that, yeah, sorry, didn't mean to cut in, but yeah.
No, not at all. But like, you just saw in terms of like the trades that were getting done this offseason, like you weren't able to say, okay, here are 4 guys who are going to be, Rule 5 eligible unless we protect them this offseason, and now we get a big leaguer, like a quality big leaguer. Nope, that's not a thing. Not a thing. Everyone wants to have major league ready depth at this point because they want to get a little bit beyond the variance that's associated with lower levels prospects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've said on the show, I mean, if the Red Sox could have gotten their starting, before they signed Duvall and they still had a hole in the outfield, it's like if they could have filled that hole by trading like Edinson Paulino or Brian Urbanski, they probably would have done that by now.
Actually, right? I think that they've been I think that 2 things are happening. I think that the industry is valuing those guys lower, and I also think that the Red Sox are right now extremely protective of some of those upside guys who are in A-ball. I think that they are very much mindful of the fact that they don't want to sell low on guys who they think have a chance to become very valuable as they move into the upper levels, whether as trade candidates or as future major league contributors.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I wanted to ask y'all about are guys who, when you were going through this process, who stood out to you, and I guess Jim kind of mentioned it a little bit and kind of not having to defend Brandon Walter, but just talking about him. Guys who you think might be either undervalued, to use the Walter example, who probably deserve a little more shine than they've been getting, or in the other sense, maybe get a little more shine. I know that might be a little harder to say, so you can pass on that one if you want, just because it's kind of hard to say, like, yeah, this guy doesn't deserve the credit he's getting. But so maybe we'll just go with, it's not quite sleepers, it's just guys who now you think maybe whether they came out higher on your list than you thought they would be, or, just otherwise there's more there than perhaps, I guess we'll call them transformers. There's more there than might meet the eye to start when you started the process.
Like, I feel like there's a drop off too. Like once you get like into the mid teens, like you guys, I guess, go 60 deep, right?
Yes.
Which, you don't have to necessarily write 300 word reports on each guy, fortunately. But let's say like both Alex and I, we have to come up with 30 guys. We both done the system in years where the system was loaded, in years where the system, the first prospect handbook, and I'm not at home, I don't have it in front of me. Like the 3 or 4 best Red Sox on my list were all like between 25. It was like Shea Hillenbrand and Justin Dusher, and they were all like in the 25 to 30 range. It was awful. Like Chol O was on that list. It was all these Asian prospects who didn't pan out. It was just a bad list. There weren't even players to do anyway. But I found, like, when I was doing this list, once I got through like the middle of the teens and then deep into the 20s, it was like, who am I going to put on to fill this list out? So, like, I'm interested in Brooks Brannon's interesting to me. I don't like you could say that about a lot of their draft guys. Like, I'm not really sure what they have in Dalton Rogers. I thought that was I guess the best way to put it, a really aggressive pick where they took him based on his track record. Like, I do, Mississippi was one of my draft states. I have half the country, and I knew who he was, but I didn't necessarily think he was going in the top 5 rounds. So he's like, I know their analytics department really likes him, and there's good shape and play on the fastball, but I frankly struggle a little bit to come up with like 30 guys that I really believed in. Like, I'm not saying every list there's 30 guys, like, oh, here's 30 big leaguers, but like personally, and I'm not trying to pick on the guy, I said this when they trade. I'm not a David Hamilton fan. I just don't think he can hit. And I didn't want to rank David Hamilton. And I was like, I have to rank David Hamilton. Like, I don't have 30 guys I think are better than him. So I don't know. I don't have like any, maybe the biggest sleeper to me would be Elmer Rodriguez Cruz, who was interesting. I think he was the 3rd youngest pitcher in the 21 draft. And he was also the lightest player in the draft at 160 pounds when they signed him. And he's interesting, and he's, he has some feel for pitching. He's had success. And if you can get him stronger, maybe the stuff even kicks up another notch. Although I don't know if you guys do. Look, I use the word projectable all the time, but there's also guys who are just skinny and they aren't projectable. And I'm not saying he's that case, but he might just be like Tristan McKenzie, who never really got any more physical. It's a good pitcher for the Guardians, but Tristan McKenzie still probably weighs like 165 pounds. Like, he's lanky. I don't even know if he's thick enough to be called lanky. But anyway, so I guess the sleeper to me would be Rodriguez Cruz, would be the one guy who I could see having some upward mobility where I'm like, this guy I think is a little unheralded. But Alex, were you struggling to get to 30 at all?
Yeah, I definitely. And I did not, I would say that I didn't necessarily see David Hamilton being, I think he ended up being my 30 or, right around there. It might've shifted a little bit as guys came and went in Rule 5. But yeah, I'm with you. I thought that the back of the system, you're like looking for names. Like, I do not like considering relievers at all until they've actually performed in the big leagues. Like, to me, Zach Kelly is like, I think Zach Kelly was the only reliever, like true reliever, that I ranked, because I've now arrived at a point where, like, I'm so skeptical even of like dominant AAA performances for relievers and how they'll translate to the big leagues until I see it replicate. So I did struggle because there weren't like lights out performances happening in the FCL or the DSL to make you say like, oh, that guy is going to be like, that guy is going to explode. I think you reach for some of those guys thinking that maybe the defensive tools will eventually translate. I guess in terms of the one sleeper where I'm like, there's a chance that guy, like, who isn't really talked about that much, could move up in interesting ways, and who gets past the question of no prospects in AA. For me, Nathan Hickey, I think, is kind of interesting because the dude can hit. It really, like, he has an idea of what he's doing at the plate. He's he figuring out how much he'll be able to catch is going to be interesting. But if he can even catch, if he can kind of catch, then he becomes pretty interesting because there's a pretty drastic dearth of catching prospects around the sport.
Yeah, I want to put him 16th on our list. I don't remember where you had him.
I think I have him right around there, like right around.
Because I believe in the bat. Like if you felt like he was a better catcher, I'd rank him a lot higher. But like he was still in that territory. It's like, okay, I believe in this guy as a prospect. And then the 20s got a little murky for me.
Yeah, I think they have a lot of guys in that range where it's like with Valdez and Hickey, it's like, I like the bat. I don't know what they're doing, what the defense is going to end up. Or you go the other way, it's like, I like Brainer Bonucci, but I'm not sure how much he's going to hit, even though he is a good defender. So it's like they're either a one, or Nico Cavadas is the same thing. Like he's could be a decent, platoon DH type, but a platoon DH, like what is that?
Yeah.
And then it's like, do I like that? Or then it's, you fall down into, okay, do I like relievers? Or is it, the Brooks brand and the guys we have no track record with, there's very minimal information. You're kind of just throwing a dart at. And yeah, I think it got very complicated after, the 18, 19, that range. Is like everyone has warts, and it's just how nitpicky do you want to get with them?
It's just personal taste. Like,
yeah.
What do you like? Like Brooks Brandon's, like, he's a better catcher than Nathan Hickey, but he's got a lot of work to do on catching. So he's kind of like the high school version of Nathan Hickey, if that makes sense. It's like, okay, I like the bat, so I'm putting him at, I don't know, I think we put him at 22. And, it's just, it's tough on those guys. I mean, they have it. They're interesting guys, but it's just like, you just, like you put it very well said, Ian, that like, I like the guy's bat, but I don't know what position he can play. Or, hey, I like this guy's glove, but I don't know if he can hit. Well, that's kind of a problem, Alex. I've put too many 28-year-old relievers on a top 30 before. Like that's not necessarily ideal. I mean, I'm the same way with you on relievers, and I find that it comes down to depth in the system. Is like when I wind up ranking more. Like I ranked Jacob Webb. I was going to call him Ryan Webb. I ranked Jacob Webb, and we'll see. Like, he still has a couple more levels to navigate. But like, it was like, okay, he's kind of interesting, and there's some good pitch characteristics. Jacob Webb, number 26 or wherever I had him. So
yeah, we did the same thing. We have Ryan Fernandez and Luis Guerrero in our top 30, and it was just we were getting down there, and it's like, I don't know. Like, Christian Koss? I think he can actually play shortstop. I think he's a good defender. I don't trust the bat at all. Is a guy who's probably a AAA depth guy. Like, do I want to take that, or I'll take a shot on like Fernandez, who, good pitch characteristics, fastball took a big step forward. He's ended the year injured, and it's just, there's just a lot of question marks with that group. And as you said, it comes down to a lot of personal preference.
Yeah, Alex Pinellas is like kind of the flip of Christian Koss, where like, okay, there's power there, but there's swing and miss, and I'm not sure what position he can really play. Yeah. So like, do you want to hang your hat on his power and throw him on the list at number 27 or something, or go in a different direction? I mean, I think we all can speak to this, and I still don't think many fans get this. Like on anybody's list, whether it's a deep system, a thinner system, in between, if you ranked, like you guys do at Sox prospects, because you go all the way down to 60. But like, let's say I had an internal list of prospects 21 through 40 in the Red Sox system. Like there's years, okay, maybe 21's clearly better. But for the most part, it's just like, which guys do you like in that group? 10 are going to make our list, 10 aren't. But it's not like prospect number 23 is worlds better than prospect 38. But fans look at it that way because one guy, like in our case, one guy's on the list, one guy's not. Or in your case, one guy's 15 spots ahead of him. So that means he's a lot better. And it's like, no, at that point, it's just a big pool of players. And, what do you prefer?
Well, it's funny because for that reason, there was a period of time where I was kind of internally advocating to make 41 to 60 just a list that's alphabetical, right? Of like, here's a tier of the next guys. And, I got outvoted rightfully. So it's like, look, just put your big boy pants on and we're going to rank them and it's going to be fine. No one's going to like come back to you 3 years from now and say, why did you rank this guy 47 instead of 43? Right. But yeah, I exactly hear what you're saying. Like if you like, look, we've got Dalton Rogers much lower than you guys have him. I completely get having him in the top 30, right? Like it makes sense, right? So it's like, it's almost like a distinction. Yeah, it's a distinction, but it creates conversation and people like the ranking, right? But it's, there's a lot of room to maneuver there and guys move quicker. And I think that's something that, I think a lot of our readers, and I'm sure a lot of your readers do kind of get that nuance to some degree, but I think sometimes, like you said, there's something to, is there that much difference at that point between guys? Jim, you mentioned Benellis, because one thing that I think has been brought up a lot, if I want to use English, is all of the deals that this front office has made for prospects, right? Where the returns have been, two guys in Hamilton and Benellis that we just talked about in not the most glowing of terms. Guys like, there's the Vasquez trade that brought back Abreu and Valdez. But there have been some questions about the Heimblum trades and the returns, particularly on the prospect side. And I'm curious what you guys think about that, about the track record so far of the returns. Even you start looking at guys like Ronaldo Hernandez is in there as well, for in a deal for, no one was saying, why are you trading Jeffrey Springs at the time? But here we are. What has been your take, and maybe Alex, as the guy on the Sox beat, I'm interested, maybe we'll throw to you first on this, but on the return that they've gotten on the deals they've made to try and build the farm system, because it does seem like there's really a strong dichotomy of what people think on the returns they've gotten and how that has affected the system.
Yeah, I think that one of the reasons why, why some people are down on their system is because they haven't managed to trade for a truly impact prospect, right? Like the only guy who looked like he was going to be that was Jeter Downs, who I don't know how much debate all of you guys had about him as 1 versus 2 with Casas entering the 2020, at the beginning, at the time of the trade, entering 2021. There was a fair debate to be had based on this really interesting upside. And then I had him outside of the top 30 before he got waived this year. And that's pretty devastating. Like you think about the trajectory of where he's gone, that's the one guy, that's the one big swing that they took in a trade for a prospect. Granted, it was supposed to be Bruce Star Gratterall, but that's a different thing. Let's stay away from that. But otherwise there's been we keep hearing depth, right? Which unquestionably the depth of the Red Sox, there are more viable options. Just as we talk about how bad the system was in 2019, in 2020, the absence of any kind of upper level support of the big league roster at the beginning of the year was just horrendous. And so they're grabbing Zach Godley off of waivers and starting after that. He was waived by the Tigers.
Yeah, there's a reason he was waived or available.
Crazy, right? They're getting cast-offs from from organizations that are tanking and giving them prominent positions. So they've addressed they have used trades as a tool of building overall depth, but we haven't seen a lot of swings for upside in the trade market. And I do think that a fair amount of the perception of the Red Sox system as being top heavy and then there being a significant drop off after the 4 is a reflection of that, right? Would it be if instead of going Winkowski and Seabold and what Valdez and Abreu, what if they had none of those guys, but they had one guy who would say that's the 97th best prospect in the game. How much would that transform the perception of their system? How much should that transform the perception of their system? Because it's fair to ask whether or not the 97th ranked prospect in the game is better than, let's say, 4 of the top 500 prospects in the game.
Yeah, it's better.
Right?
You win with stars.
Probably better. Okay.
You wrote a book about it.
Yeah.
You win with stars. I mean, I do think.
But is the 97th ranked prospect a star? Right. That's also a fair point.
No, but he's the 97th ranked prospect is somebody you all like. We could disagree with individual lists, but a guy who's a top 100 prospect is a guy who's a everyday player at the big league level, or he's a member of a rotation, or if the guy winds up in the pen, you're projecting he's going to be a difference-making reliever. And I do think like it's nice to have depth, but you win with stars. Like your best farm systems stand out because they have stars, not because they might have stars and depth, but I don't think like if you gave me like that's why it's interesting with the Red Sox. They have they have 4 top 100 prospects, which is more than most teams because the average team is obviously going to have 3, and there's some teams that have 8 or 7 or 6. And like, would you? We haven't ranked the farm systems like we were talking about earlier. Like the Red Sox to me are probably middle of the pack farm system, propped up by they have that big 4 and some other interesting guys. But yeah, I do think it's a valid criticism. I was gonna say like they haven't made too many trades where they've traded away, like when they've traded away Betts and Benintendi, it wasn't like they were making baseball trades. But those are the 2 examples where they were trading guys who, and even Benintendi's value had kind of started to dip, but they were trading guys who had value. Like most of the time they've been making these like more minor trades, like, hey, we're trading Kevin Pillar for Jacob Wallace or something. And I think like when I hear from Red Sox fans, I hear disappointment in that, Heim came from Tampa Bay where they were, you always want to check your wallet when Tampa Bay calls to make a trade. Like, wait a minute, they're asking for that guy. They might be good. And the rate, like when they traded Ronaldo Hernandez's star had dimmed when the Red Sox made that trade. He was a former top 100 prospect, but like you guys, I wasn't like, oh man, like I was like, man, I can't believe they just traded. I actually was like, what are the Rays doing? I can't believe they just traded for Jeffrey Springs and gave up Ronaldo Hernandez, even though I didn't think Ronaldo Hernandez was a top 100 guy. But like, I think people expected, okay, Heim's coming from Tampa Bay. He's a master. He's going to do this, like when they make trades for minor leaguers, the guys are going to blow up and become really good players. And, Connor Siebold's got this great changeup. He's going to be a factor. And Connor Siebold got DFA'd this offseason. Like, and they just haven't been able to make, even when they've made like smaller moves to hit on guys. And you go back, and again, the Mookie Betts trade, look, that was tough. Like, I don't think Heim came in and said, hey, I want this job. I want to trade Mookie Betts. Like, yeah, I don't think he talked John Henry and ownership into, you know what? I don't know if you guys thought about this. We should trade Mookie Betts. It'd be a good move for us. Like, I don't think that was Heim's fault, but it hurts. You got Alex Verdugo and Connor Wong. It's like, you guys made a trade with the Dodgers for Mookie Betts and you couldn't do better than that. Like I still think that stings even however many years, like, what is it, 3 years later? Oh, yeah. Like, they didn't come close.
Yeah, because the consequences of it are present.
Trade, but
the consequences of it are present, right? Like, if Jeter Downs had emerged as the player that they wanted, then this offseason, post Bogart's departure, looks different.
Yeah.
And instead, they're left in this dire scramble for up the middle players because they're putting Jeter Downs on waivers in order to find roster spots for back of the 40-man guys.
And I guess maybe a counterpoint. I don't know that Khalil Lee was ever a top 100 guy. I just looked, and apparently he was on BP's list relatively recently. But I think the counterpoint might be, you're probably not getting a top 100 guy for Andrew Benintendi, right? Like, Betts is the one guy you needed to hit on and get the top 100 guy that was going to, coming from a talent-rich farm system, you've got to pick the guy that's going to hit, right? Because I'm here in DC, they got a couple guys from that farm system who look pretty good. One that just got paved this week, right? So when you're going to make that deal, you got to hit on it. But would you be better off with Khalil Lee instead of I guess they got Winkowski.
The answer is no. The answer right now is a hard no under the circumstances.
Well, even ignoring the off-field piece of this, I would still feel that way. But even with the off-field, but yeah, so it's they're prospects. They're not sure things is the thing we always say.
Well, but I think, though, that you look, and what Alex said is right, is the few times they have gone for those like low-level lottery tickets, it's just not worked out. Like Freddie Valdez is someone who comes to mind, like in that trade. They went for it there with, they went for more of a quantity-based package, got a couple of like with Winkowski, like looks like he could be like a solid up and down guy, maybe if you look at him as a long guy, long reliever. And then with the rest of the package, you go for the more, let's take a swing for it. And so far, stuff like that hasn't come off. And I think that when you combine that with, as you said, that they're not exactly trading, the high end impact guys. And I think that's what kind of makes last year's trade deadline more interesting to me, is that they had the opportunity to trade someone like a JD Martinez, who you probably could have got something back for Eovaldi, and also get under the luxury tax at the same time. But you chose just to trade Christian Vasquez. It's just, it kind of just leaves some confusion, I think, in the fan base too, of like, what is the what's the ultimate goal there?
All right, well, let me wrap up with y'all. We've had you on for plenty of time here, more than plenty of time. Maybe just as a parting shot, give me a prediction for something on next year's list when we're looking at this next year, whether it's a change, whether it's the same, I guess, but something we're looking at differently that is the same. I don't know. We're looking at it. We're going to lose Casas, obviously. But other than that, there's a lot that could happen. So one big prediction for how this list is going to look this time next year.
Well, I think the safest prediction is that Marcel Meyer will be number one. There's a safe prediction.
Exciting and not boring prediction.
I'll go back to what I said earlier. I do think this has a chance to be a volatile list just because there's a lot of young guys. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if there's, like you said, we're going to lose Casas off the list. We may lose Mata or Walter. I could see the top 10 next year, not counting guys they draft in the draft this year, but I can see the top 10 next year maybe having 5 guys in it who aren't in the top 10 right now, which is, I think, unusual. Don't ask me which 5 those are going to be, because I don't know. But no, I mean, it's possible that Perales and Wilcom Gonzalez could be their top 2 pitching prospects a year from now. Mm-hmm. It's possible that some of these draft guys they got last year that they're high on, really pan out. Nathan Hickey. Maybe Nathan Hickey goes out and hits 25 home runs and makes some strides behind the plate. So I feel like it's going to be a very volatile list just because of how young so many of the top players are.
Yeah, I'll say that one of the high school draftees of recent years, whether that's York Romero or Anthony, I'm going to guess one of those, or Blaze Jordan. I'm going to guess one of those dudes ends up in the top 100 at the end of this year, and I'm going to guess that. I'll remove Jordan from that because I didn't have him in the top 10 this year. But one of those guys is dropping out of the top 10. That is the nature of the volatile system, and they're going to see, they're rolling the dice on guys with, who don't have track records against advanced pitching, and obviously they feel confident in their ability to evaluate hit tools against lower level performance. But I think that there'll be, I think that risk. Well, what we'll see is a risk reward strategy that doesn't necessarily lead to a steady floor of where their system is. And I think that I do think that we're going to see, there's only so much ground for them to move up this coming year. I actually think that the real issue is that Casas is, since Casas is graduating, Mata is going to be maybe Walter are probably or they're probably graduating. I'm not sure that Rafaela can really boost his stock too much above where he is. Blaze is the one guy who can really hypercharge the system if he emerges as elite, but I'm not sure if this is the year when that happens. So really interesting year, because for everything that the Red Sox are trying to do, they need to be on that. They need to continue on that upward trajectory. And I don't think that there's any guarantee that they're heading there for the coming season. There's the possibility, as we've been talking about the whole time, there's upside, there's lack of floor. They could go in either way, and this is a pretty pivotal year, not just for their big league team, but for their farm system.
Ian, you want to throw one out there?
Yeah,
I think I know what yours is going to be. But
no, well, I would say that I think there's a pretty decent chance, given the volatility, that someone who's outside of all of our top 30s is in the top 15 by the end of the season. And I don't know who that is. I have some names to throw out, but it's all you're throwing darts. At this point, there's just a lot of question marks, and they do have some young, interesting guys from the draft, some international guys who are coming up from the DSL potentially. But yeah, I just think there's so much uncertainty, and with Casas, Mata, guys like that graduating, you need to see that next wave of development in order to fill those gaps in the system. Because right now there are definitely some clear gaps that are gonna, I think, only get exacerbated as the guys near the top thin out, especially with, as we talked about earlier, Portland just not having a lot of potential talent at the beginning of this year.
That sounds right. I was going to say something like that too. Someone out of either the complexes or that Salem team that's outside of our top 30s, inside the top 15. At least I'd say at least 2. So beautiful. All right. Alex, Jim, thank you for your time. Do we want to do the tell everyone where they can find you move and find your stuff? I introduced Alex first, so Jim, you can go first in shilling your various wares if you'd like.
I try to tweet about it and other stuff we do at Jim Callis MLB on Twitter. And like the one plug I always put in is all our stuff's free because it's MLB.com. MLB.com is trying to obviously promote the game. So like none of our stuff's behind a paywall. So you can read all of our reports and everything. And I will tip my hat like real quick to you guys. Alex was saying this, I think either at the beginning or before when they air. Your guys' site, I wish every team I do a top 34 had the equivalent of Sox prospects, because the depth of information that you guys present, and I mean, do you guys even have a Patreon level? It's all free, right? I mean, is it pretty much a labor of love?
We have some Patreon content based on
on the. So I guess there's, but it's still the amount of volume of work you guys do. Most of it's free. Is unbelievable, and I especially, I can't tell you how many times, like the hardest piece of information for me to find sometimes is why a guy missed time. Like guy missed 3 weeks in April, like minor league or whatever, minor league information, injury information, it's not out there. How many times Sox prospects has bailed me out with that information? And every year when I'm doing a Red Sox list and I'm filling in a blank because you guys have it, I'm like, I wish there was, DodgersProspects.com or the equivalent for all the other organizations. You guys do an unbelievable job.
Well, we appreciate that,
and as does Alex. But
this is true. We will have you on.
I'm just following in the footsteps of the greats.
Amen.
I don't know about that, but
amen. And Alex, where can people find you and your stuff and homegrown and all of that excellent stuff?
Boston Globe, Baseball America, as Jim handed off the baton, a decade or so ago, and as well as on Nesson sometimes when I say silly things.
You will remain Stat Masterson.
So I am on MLB Network occasionally.
Oh, that's right too. Yes, you will remain Stat Masterson even if Eck is not there to call you that. We're gonna have to tell Lou to call you that. To make sure
I'll call myself that if I have to. I'm gonna wear the hat.
Love it.
A hat says Stat Masterson on it. That gave me a nickname. I'm keeping the damn nickname.
So it's like Norm Macdonald playing Burt Reynolds on Celebrity Jeopardy. It's a funny hat.
Which I just introduced my children to, by the way. It's it still hits.
That's good parenting right there.
Yeah. That's good parenting.
Arguable, but satisfying parenting nonetheless.
Hard disagree. No, that's a classic. All right. Well, thank you guys. We kept you on here for too long. Much appreciated. Everyone listening, we will be back we'll record something either from or just after our trip to Fort Myers. So hopefully we'll have some interesting we'll definitely have some interesting tidbits and a lot to talk about. So Jim, Alex, thank you. Everybody listening, we'll be back in your eardrums soon.